Okay, uh, so let's start. So we are mostly done with synchronization. I'll wrap it up today with some classical problems on synchronization. So just to give you a recap, for synchronization, we started with the software solutions. We talked about test and set, semaphores, and monitors. So we have talked about solving this one toy problem, which is the producer-consumer problem. So we have discussed it at length. The idea is there is more such toy problems in synchronization, which researchers they have tried to solve. So we'll discuss few of them. So these toy problems, although they are the classical problems in synchronization, but you'll also see them in real world implementation again and again. So as an example, the producer consumer problem, which we discussed about, having a buffer of a fixed length, producer trying to produce some items, consumer trying to take some items out from it. So a real world application of this is streaming videos. So whenever you are watching a video and it is being buffered from internet, there it happens. So there is this buffer. So it will definitely be a fixed size buffer. So you would see that for your videos, it displays it as buffering video. So whenever this video is buffered, there is a thread which is running, which takes the content from an online server and it places it in a buffer, and then there is another thread which is reading all this information from the buffer. So it can probably be your media player and it displays it to you. Please don't disturb me. Finish with all your talking and maybe then I'll talk. Okay, so this is one example of a producer-consumer problem as you see it in the real world. So there are more such problems. So another such problem is the readers-writers problem. Readers-writers problem is kind of a generalization of producer-consumer problem, not an exact generalization, some generalization and some modification. So let's say in producer-consumer problem, I have instead of one producer and one consumer, I have let's say one producer and many consumers. Then how will you do it? And things will change. So instead of consumers, let's say these are readers. So what's the difference between a consumer and a reader? Consumer, when it reads data from a buffer, it takes it away. It pops that item. That item is basically deleted from the buffer. A reader doesn't do that. So whatever a writer is writing in the buffer, a reader is only reading it. It's not making any changes to the buffer, right? So can you now think of what kind of synchronization will be required in readers writers problem? So let's say there is one writer's thread which is running and then there are many reader threads which are running. So a typical example of this is your database management systems. You have studied this course, you're finished with that course? It's going on. Okay. So it happens with your databases, right? So there is one database administrator. There can be more than one. So let's talk about only one as of now. So he or she is the one which is writing in this database, and then there are a lot of readers who might be applying all those SQL queries on that database, trying to fetch data out of that, right? So there can be many readers. Now, where do you see I need synchronization? So in a producer consumer problem, I wanted that producer and consumer, both of them should not access the buffer at the same time. What will happen in the readers and writers? What do you think? So let's say there are multiple writers and multiple readers. So there can be more than one person which is making changes to the database. So which threads should not run together and which threads can run together? Do you think no two threads can run together, or are there threads which can run together? Readers can run together, right? So all these reader threads, they can execute together, but again you'll have to implement synchronization primitive when a reader and writer they tries to access the database together. So whether it's a writer or it's a reader writer, right, then you'll have to ensure that synchronization happens. So as you'll study it in database management system, there are primitives called read and write locks which you can use on database in order to achieve that. So you'll study that in this semester. Okay. We are going to discuss one more toy example. It's quite an interesting problem and little bit tricky to solve. So it's called the dining philosopher's problem. How many of you have heard about it? It's a very popular problem. Has anyone heard about it? Okay, so the problem goes like this. There are 5 philosophers. They are sitting around a round table. So Let's put some people here. So I have 5 people here. So what these philosophers do is the entire day they keep sitting, they think, they discuss, and they eat. That's all they do. In order to do this, they have 5 chopsticks available. So these are my 5 chopsticks. So between two philosophers, there is one chopstick, and in the middle there is a bowl of rice or noodles, whatever. So what these philosophers do is, at a time they do only one thing. So they are either thinking or discussing. When they are done thinking and discussing and they feel hungry, they grab chopsticks. So each philosopher requires 2 chopsticks to eat, one on his left and other on his right. So you cannot literally pick just any chopstick. You are supposed to take the one which are nearest to you. So you grab those chopsticks, finish eating, keep it back, and then you again start thinking and discussing. So do we need any synchronization primitive here, and how will you apply semaphores in this condition? Any ideas? So this philosopher here, he requires these 2 chopsticks in order to proceed. This one requires these 2, this one requires these 2, so on and so forth. How can we come up with a solution for this? So to come up with a solution for this, let me try to just simplify the solution so that you can see it from a perspective of semaphores. How exactly can we use semaphores here? So I'm just simplifying this problem. So let's say there are 5 philosophers and 1 chopstick. Right? 5 philosophers and 1 chopstick, and everyone, they need just 1 chopstick to eat. How will you use semaphore in that condition? So this is a version which we have discussed in the class. So there are 5 of you. There is 1 chopstick. All of you need to access this chopstick, but definitely no 2 of you can use it at the same time. So what kind of synchronization primitive you can use? It's a simple lock. Right? It's a simple semaphore. So what each process can do here? Before taking the chopstick, so you can start this variable C. So 5 philosophers, 1 chopstick, and 1 chopstick needed to eat. So you can set this shared variable C, which is initially set to 1. So whenever a philosopher is hungry and wants to eat, he can call a wait operation on C, finish eating, and then can signal C. Sounds good? Will there be any problem here? Are all the conditions satisfied? Mutual exclusion, progress, bounded wait. Yes. So definitely no 2 of them can eat at the same time. If one is not eating, other can pick the chopstick and eat. And there is also bounded wait because of the queue, which we discussed yesterday. So so the idea is, whenever a philosopher, let's say the first one is eating, executing in its critical section, the second one wants to eat. So what will happen? He will call this wait operation and he'll be put in a queue, essentially. He won't go in an infinite loop. He's in a queue. When this philosopher is done eating the cheap noodles, he can inform the other one. He'll wake that process up. So he'll wake him up. Now you can go ahead and eat. Right? Okay. What will change if, let's say, there are again 5 philosophers, 1 chopsticks, but you require 2 chopsticks to eat? That's not possible. Just a second. So let me change it. So let's say there are 5 philosophers and 2 chopsticks. Sorry. Right? And you also require 2 chopsticks to eat. How will the solution look then? Can you just modify this solution here? It will be same. So do I need to do some change here? Okay, so we do 3 operations on semaphores: initialize, wait, and signal. Here I initialize C with 1, and then we had a wait and signal. So should I now also initialize it with 1?
Maybe we can have one and two. If someone accidentally just gets one chopstick, then we can mark it as one, and only when it exceeds both do we mark it.
Okay. So how should a solution for this look like? And tell me the exact lines.
Wait and signal will be the same.
Wait and signal will be the same. Okay.
Blocks can have 1 and 2.
Okay. So do I need two semaphore variables or one? The first question. So initially I was having just one semaphore variable, which was C. Should I have now only C, or should I have C1 or C2? So one solution is we can have two, right? So one is for the first chopstick, another is for the second chopstick. Initially both of these are available. So I can set C1 equals to 1, C2 equals to 1, and whenever a philosopher wants to eat, he can actually call a wait on C1, right? Waiting for the first chopstick. He is also waiting for the second chopstick. So wait C2, right? And then he can eat, and then he can signal both of these. Signal C1, signal C2. Each of these philosophers is following the same protocol. So exactly same thing for everyone else also. Okay. All conditions satisfied here. Can I run in some kind of problem here? Think about it.
If one philosopher has one chopstick and it's in the waiting state,
Okay.
and another philosopher has another one and even he's in the waiting state, so it's almost
Okay. Can that happen here?
No, because we have the order, wait, even and then wait.
Right, we have the order. So what happens, let's say the first one wants first chopstick, it's going to call a wait operation on this, and C1 now becomes 0. Now the idea is the second one, he is also calling a wait on C1 first, right? So in case he also tries to take this first chopstick, he is blocked. So anyhow, this is the only philosopher who can proceed, have both the chopsticks, finish it and done, right? In case I change this to wait C2 and wait C1, then the problem will happen, which you suggested, right? Now the first one, he can take C1, making it 0. Another one can take C2, make it 0, and then both of them are waiting for each other, which is a deadlock. Okay, given that we now have some intuition to solve this problem, let's come to the original problem and try to solve that. So how we can use semaphores there? So everyone requires one chopstick on the left and other on the right. So let me come back here. So how do I implement semaphores here? So let me just name all these to make it easy. So let's say this is P0, P1, P2, P3, P4, and then I have these chopsticks, which is, let's say, C0, C1, C2, C3, C4. Right? Okay. So how do I modify my solution to this? You cannot just like that pick any chopsticks.
wait C and plus 1.
Exactly, right? So what P node can do? So P node is going to apply a wait on C naught and a wait on C1, executes, signal on C naught, signal on C1, right? P1 is going to do the same things with C1 and C2. So P1 is going to apply a wait on C1, a wait on C2, signal C1, signal C2. And everyone follows the same order. So P2 is applying wait on C2 and C3, P3 is applying wait on C3 and C4, P4 is applying wait on C4 and C0, right? So if you want to write it in a generalized way, so what each process is doing, so if you look at the process Pi, so Pi is calling a wait on Ci. So a good way to represent it is actually use an array. So C can be an array which has I can use this, right, to represent all the 5 chopsticks. 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, right? So Pi, it can call a wait on C of I, and it can call a wait on Ci plus 1. It can signal Ci and signal Ci plus 1. Is it correct or there is something wrong with the way I have written it? Last one, right? So for P4 in this case, it's going to be C5, which doesn't exist. So I'll basically use a modulo 5 here, which will resolve the solution, which will resolve the problem. I'm sorry. Okay. Okay. Now, can there be a problem with this solution? So look at the weight statements of all the philosophers. So P naught is waiting on C naught first, right? It's waiting on C naught and C1. So its first statement is wait C naught. P2 it is waiting on C1. P3 is waiting on C2. P4 is waiting on C3. And the last one is waiting on C4. What will happen, right? In the worst case, P naught will take C naught, P1 will take C1, P2 will take C2, P3 will take C3, P4 will take C4. So basically everyone has picked one chopstick. That's what is happening in practice. And then all of them are waiting for another chopstick. So it's again a deadlock here, right? So this solution to dining philosopher's problem does not work. So we should have a solution to this problem, and that's what we are going to talk about today. So we are going to talk about deadlocks. So it's a deadlocked state. So whenever we talk about deadlock, it just doesn't happen for shared memory. So definitely synchronization is one such construct which gives rise to deadlock, but deadlock can also happen because of other resources. So basically whenever you have resources in your system which multiple processes they are sharing, which they are competing for, you can have a deadlock. It need not essentially be a shared memory. So as an example, let's say there are many processes, they want to access the printer, right, and scanner, and there can be many other resources which these processes are competing for. So the executions can be in such a way that the processes are deadlocked. So to give you an analogy for this, let's say there are two kids, right? Both of them, they want to sketch. So in order to sketch, they need certain resources. So there is a table in front of them. So there is a sketchbook and a crayon there. Both of these kids, they want to sketch. To sketch, you need both the resources. Both of them run towards the table. One picks the book, another picks the crayon, and now they are fighting. One needs crayon and another needs book. So it's a deadlock. So it keeps happening with the processes in the system. We'll talk about how often it happens, but it can happen with, let's say, a very simple example of this is two processes, one of which requires a disk and another one requires a printer. So the code in this case will look like, so the first one, it is waiting for the disk, another one is waiting for the printer. So these need not essentially be your shared variables, it can be any resource in your system. The first one, after using the disk, it's going to declare I am done using, anyone else can use it, and the other one also does the same thing. And again the same thing here, if the other one requires printer first, so it's going to wait on printer, this one is waiting on disk, and after doing, it is signaling printer and it releases disk. Right? So again the same problem here, the process P0, it acquires disk. Process P1, it acquires printer. Now P0 is waiting for disk and P1 is waiting for printer. Again, there is a deadlock. Right? And the thing with deadlock is, it's not necessary that it will happen with just two processes. As we have seen in dining philosopher's problem, there can be 5 processes who are in a deadlock. There can be 10, there can be 20. So any number of processes can be in deadlock at a given time. Okay. So what we are going to talk today is about these three things. So first of all, why deadlocks happen. So what are the necessary conditions which should hold in a computer that deadlocks happen? In which kind of systems a deadlock will not happen? And then we are going to talk about two things. One is deadlock prevention and another is deadlock avoidance. Now both of these, they sound the same, prevention and avoidance. What's the difference between them? So prevention, all of us have heard of. Prevention is better than cure. So it's the same thing. You don't let deadlock happen. So this becomes the responsibility of an application programmer. So whenever you are writing a program, you should write your program so that a deadlock never happens. So it's your responsibility as a programmer. Deadlock avoidance, it is slightly different. So deadlock avoidance is the responsibility of the system programmer or the operating system. So an application programmer can write any code. So according to his code, execution can go in such a way that a deadlock happens. But a system programmer should write a separate algorithm in the operating system which should ensure that deadlock doesn't happen. How it will ensure that deadlock doesn't happen? If at any time it feels that executing this particular line of code can result in a deadlock, it should not allow the process to proceed. We will talk about how that can be done. Okay, why deadlocks happen? So there are four kind of necessary conditions. They are also slightly obvious for when can deadlocks happen. So the first condition is mutual exclusion. So mutual exclusion says that there should be at least one resource in your system which two processes cannot use at the same time. So that's obviously a requirement for deadlock, right? If all the resources in your system are such that any processes can use them and at any time, then what's the need for deadlock? So it's the idea that if those two kids who were fighting for crayons and that book, right, if there was a way that both of them can access it at the same time, so they tear the book in two parts, they also break the crayon, both of them can proceed at the same time, right? But in system that thing cannot always happen. So here is an example. So let's say in the readers writers problem, there is no writer, there are only readers, right? So why will a deadlock happen? Readers can all access the buffer or the database at the same time, right? So deadlock will not happen. So the first condition is there is at least one resource in the system which cannot be shared between two processes at the same time. So definitely at different times they can access that. Second is hold and wait. So this all comes from, if you remember that, let's say the disk and printer example. So what was happening there? Hold and wait means there is one process which already has a resource, it has held a resource and is waiting for the other one, right? And at least how many such processes should be there in the system for a deadlock to happen? At least two, right? So let's say there is exactly one process which is holding a resource. So it has a resource. Let's say this is the resource it has held and it requires some other resource. So this one is in hold and wait. It has one resource, it requires the other, but there should be at least one other process like this. Otherwise, what will happen? Let's say this hold and wait is not true for other processes in the system. So another process, so if no one has held it, anyhow it can use this other resource and release it. If someone has held it, it will eventually release and this process will leave this resource. So hold and wait, at least two processes should hold and wait in the system. So deadlock cannot happen with just one process. Third one is no preemption. So as you remember, what is preemption? We have talked about preemption in terms of CPU scheduling. When a process is executing and you forcefully take away the CPU from it, right? So with CPUs, preemption can happen. In the case of deadlocks, if you want deadlocks to happen, we don't want them to happen definitely. But if deadlocks have to happen, there should be no preemption. Basically, you cannot forcefully take away someone's resource. So when these two kids were fighting, the mother can come, she can snatch crayon from one and give it to other, and that child can proceed. This is not allowed in the system. So you cannot just like that take away resource from any one process. And now you see here, so CPUs can never be, your processors can never be the part of this deadlock. Why? Because we have preemptive scheduling policies. So you can always snatch away CPUs from processes, but you cannot snatch away other resources. There is this last condition, which is the single most important for deadlocks to happen. This one is circular wait. So this is interesting in the sense that, as we have discussed in the dining philosopher's problem, so you should have a chain of processes, you should have a chain of people, something like one is waiting for other is waiting for someone else, this someone else is waiting for someone else, and at the back this one is waiting for the first one. So essentially there should be a cycle. In what sense there should be a cycle? So there is something called a resource allocation graph. It makes it easy for you to imagine what is happening. So what this resource allocation graph is telling you in this scenario, which I have shown you here, there are 4 threads, T1, T2, T3, T4, 4 threads or 4 processes, and R1, R2, R3, R4, they are the resources, right? So how do I represent the situation? Whenever a thread, it wants a resource, we have a directed edge from the thread to resource. So if you want a resource, let's say Pi, I'm sorry, if Ti, it wants a resource Ri, you will see an edge from Ti to Ri. Basically, Ti wants Ri. If a resource is allocated to a particular thread, so let's say Tj is allocated Rj, you will see an arrow in the opposite direction. So you will see an arrow from Rj to Tj. Right? So can you look at this figure and tell me who is holding what and who is requesting what? T2 is holding R1. No, I'm sorry. T2 is requesting R1. Right? We have an edge from T2 to R1. Basically means T2 wants R1. We have an edge from R3 to T2. It means T2 has R3. Right? And if you look at this, can you tell me whether there is a deadlock or not? So what is happening? T2 is having R3 and T2 wants R1. Right? T2 cannot proceed. T3 has R1, but T3 is waiting for R2. T3 cannot proceed. T4 is having R2 and it is back waiting for R3. Right? T4 can also not proceed because anyhow T2 is having R3. Right? So there is a deadlock. And the best way of seeing there is a deadlock is, you see there is a cycle in this graph. So whenever you have this cycle, you can say that there is a deadlock. Now, do you think it is a necessary condition for deadlock to happen? Can you say that if you see a cycle, then deadlock is definitely there, or still there is a possibility that there is a cycle but there is no deadlock? It's not necessary. Why?
It isn't necessary for all. So we have to together and like take one on each one.
Yes. So what Mika is saying, this all should happen at the same time. Right? It is time dependent. If at some particular time in your system you see such a graph, then deadlock will happen. Right? Okay. It might not happen in case you see a cycle, in case you have multiple instances of a resource. So let's say there were two processes and they were being deadlocked because of printer. I append one more printer to my system. Right? So you can have multiple instances of a particular resource. So in that case, look at this one here. So what is happening now? I have two instances of R3 here, right? So there are exactly the same, both of which can be accessed at the same time. So R3 it has two instances, R4 it has four instances, R1 and R2 has one instance, right? So whenever you say that, whenever you see that, so if you see here, I have an edge from R3 to T3. So T3 basically has R3, but it only has one instance of R3. So we do not differentiate here that T3 has exactly this instance of R3. T3 has one instance of R3. Can you now look at this and tell me whether there is a deadlock? Can one of these threads execute? So T1 can definitely execute, but then what about T2, T3, T4? Can one of them execute? T2 can execute, is it? So T2 requires R1, right? But T3 has R1. T4. T3 can execute. What does, let's look at. So T3 it requires R2, right? T3 requires R2, T4 has R2. So T3 can also not execute. What about T4? T4 also cannot execute, right? T4 requires R3, but T2 has one instance of R3 and T3 also has one instance of R3. So this system here, it's also in a deadlocked state. Okay, what about this one on the right side? What we have done is we have just increased one instance of R3. I now have three R3 kind of resources in my system. Is there a deadlock now? Still there? Come again? Okay. So we feel like T1 can execute. Okay. Others are in deadlock, or can others execute? T1 can execute, right? So when T1 execute, it actually releases one instance of R3. So T1 is done. It releases one instance of R3. So one is now free. Right? T4 can now pick it up. So don't be confused by this arrow pointing to one particular square in this rectangle. It basically tells me you can take any of these three instances. All of them are exactly similar. So now one instance of R3 is free. T4 can actually use it. Right? T4 requires only R3. Oh, sorry. T4 requires only R3, right? So T4 finishes its execution and it releases again that resource, right? And when T4 does this, it's also going to release R2. It has done. T4 has finished. So R2 is now also free. Now T3, it can use R2. T3 can finish executing, and then T2 can also finish executing, right? So in this case, there is no deadlock. Any doubts here? Okay. So let's see. So what will happen initially? So if I rub all of this, let's go step by step. So this is the state of my system. Which thread can execute now? So if all the instances of R3 are occupied, R2 is also occupied, R1 is also occupied completely, right? T4 needs R3, it cannot run. T3 needs R2, it cannot run. T2 needs R1, it cannot run. But if you look at T1, it doesn't need anything, right? So if you see, so one idea of looking at it is T1 can now execute because it is not holding on to anything, right? So T1 actually executes. So let me say T1 executes. When T1 executes, it releases R3. Now that process can execute which required R3. Who required R3? T4 required R3, right? So T4 can now execute because one R3 is free now. This one executes. T4 is going to release R2, right? Who needed R2? T3. So now T3 can execute, and then T3 makes R1 free. T2 needed R1, that at the end T2 runs. Okay. So if you see in this case, there is still a cycle, but the concept of cycle, it doesn't hold when you have multiple instances of a resource. If you have a single instance of a resource, then looking at the cycle is the way to actually, is a necessary condition for deadlock to occur. If you have multiple instances, then you have to do some more calculation there. Okay. Now, if we look at these four conditions here, which we talked about, mutual exclusion, hold and wait, no preemption, and circular wait, right? So if you look at these first three conditions here, they are nothing but the design decisions of how you want your system to be, right? And actually these three conditions, they decide whether there can be a circular wait in your system or not. So what I'm trying to say, if you see a circular wait, then deadlock is there. And what decides whether circular wait will be there or not? These three conditions. But then again, if these three conditions are there, that's a necessary condition, but not a sufficient condition that you will see a circular wait. Right? So it is so possible that all these three conditions are true, but yet you do not have a circular wait. But if these three conditions are there, then there is a chance that you can have a circular wait, and that's why a deadlock. Okay. And this resource allocation graph, if you look at it, it keeps changing with time, right? So initially when you start a process running, which has a lot of threads which require resources, there will be no, all the edges will be request edges, right? With the time the edges will change, with the time this resource allocation graph changes. So if during this time you see a cycle, then there is a deadlock. So what I'm trying to say is, maybe you run a process 2 times, first time there is no deadlock, second time there can be deadlock. So whether deadlock happens or not, it totally depends on what is your sequence of request and release. Right? So even in that dining philosopher's problem, right, you won't always have deadlock. It depends on in which order these philosophers feel hungry and try to grab the chopstick. So a deadlock will happen when all of them feel hungry at the same time. If they feel hungry one by one, you won't see any deadlock. So this circular weight, it is sequence dependent. Okay. Let's now come to deadlock prevention. Right? So how do you prevent deadlocks from happening? So we know that the deadlock is happening because of these four conditions, right? The first three, if first three are not there, definitely the fourth one cannot happen. So the idea here is if you can actually nullify any of these one conditions, deadlock will vanish, right? So let's see, can we remove some of these conditions from happening? So I want a system in which deadlock should not occur at all. I need not worry about deadlock. So what I'll try is I make any of these conditions false here. Now, when we talked about the first three conditions, these are actually the design primitives. This is how your operating system is built. How are the resources in your system? So first three conditions, these are the choice of system programmer. So me as an application programmer, I can go to the system programmer and I'll say, why don't you make one of these conditions false? There are just three conditions, right? So if you make one of these three conditions false, I don't have to care about my program. Anyhow, deadlocks won't happen. So from a system programmer's perspective, let's see which of these conditions can he make false. So the first condition, mutual exclusion. So to make this condition false, we are essentially saying that all the resources in the system should be shareable, right? Is that always possible? That's not always possible, right? Specifically in the case of when the resource is a printer. So you only have most of the times one printer attached to a system. So you cannot make everything shareable. If you want to make everything shareable, you'll have to get more and more resources. The system programmer won't want that. So our whole idea of building an operating system is that we should be most efficient with least number of resources. So he cannot make this condition false. Look at the second one. So it says hold and wait, right? So let's try to make this condition false. So what hold and wait was saying, I'm holding one resource and I'm asking for the another one. So what we are saying to the system programmer, that shouldn't be allowed. So any process should not be allowed to do that. So you are holding something and you request for something more, that should not happen. How can we guarantee that that shouldn't happen? So one idea, there are two ideas to do that. So first idea is you write your program such that every process, whatever it wants to execute, whatever resources it wants, it should request them all at once at the beginning of your program. Then it should execute the program and then release. Right? Then hold and wait will not happen. It has whatever it needs at once, it can execute and then it can release all of them. What's the problem with this? It will again make the system less efficient. Let's say a process runs for 24 hours. During those 24 hours, sometimes it requires printer, sometimes it requires scanner, sometimes it requires a disk, sometimes it requires a shared memory. So what essentially I'm saying is you request for all of these at once. I lock all these resources for you. You finish and at the end will release them. Right? So during these 24 hours, no other process which requires any of these resources can execute. So again, it is not efficient. There is a second approach, it is rather interesting. So it says that you do not give them all the resources at once, but what you do is, whenever someone has something, whenever a process has a resource and it asks me for any more resource, you just take whatever it already has. So you don't give it anything, but you also take what it is holding. So a hold and wait won't happen. So it's holding something, and while holding, if it tries to take something else, you don't allow it to wait, right? You take everything away from it, and then some other process can execute. So it's similar to what happens in classroom. So when I show you your answer scripts, you can come to me asking for more marks, but instead of giving you more, I take whatever you already have, right? So again, that's not a very good approach, right? Okay. Another approach is no preemption. So no preemption means if you want to false this condition, it means that you can forcefully take away resources. So if there is a deadlock happening in my system, you are waiting for something, so I'll snatch that resource from some other process and give it to you. So I should have those kind of algorithms implemented. What's the problem with this? It will make the operating system's code all the more complicated, and your system programs, they'll have to decide. So see, you are forcefully snatching the resource from some particular process, then there should be decision policies. From which process should you forcefully take it away? So you should not forcefully take it away from some process which is having a high priority. There might be other kind of decisions involved. So it will make the code all the more complicated, and generally it's difficult for us to write an operating system like that. So already we are at a much complicated state. So because of these context switches made everything complicated. Because of context switches, we had to talk about synchronization. Because of synchronization, we are now talking about deadlocks. Right, so algorithms will just keep increasing. It's not preferred now. So a system programmer now, he cannot falsify any of these conditions. It again comes back to the application programmer. He has now written a code, and now he's trying to make this last condition false, and the last condition is circular wait. Right? So how do you ensure that a circular wait do not happen? You can do that by imposing an ordering on your resources. So let's again take the example of dining philosophers. So what we can do is, so let's say there are processes from P0, P1 up to Pn in my system, and there are resources from R0, R1 to Rm in my system. Right? So what I'm going to say, once a process, it has requested a resource R0, or let's say it has requested a resource R1, it has to always request the resources in ascending order. So once you have requested R1, you can request R10, you can request R15, but you cannot request R0. And imposing this constraint, it will ensure that you don't have deadlocks. So look at the dining philosopher's problem. What is happening? So P0 wanted C0, we can give it to him. P1 wanted C1, give it. P2 wants C2, give it. P3 wants C3, give it. But if you look at P4, P4 wanted C0, right? That will not be allowed. Right? So you are maintaining a strict ordering there. So that is one of the ways. Okay. But again, you have to write your programs in that order. So your programs will become all the more complicated. So these are some deadlock prevention strategies so that a deadlock never happens in your system. There is one more way. So what happens is, so let's talk about this. What is the probability of a deadlock happening? Do you think that you will see deadlocks often in your system, or will they occur once in a while? It would be very rare, right? So think about, so let's say if you're talking from the perspective of two processes which wanted disks and printers, one took disk, one took printer, the probability of that happening is 0.5. In that case, it is high. But generally, whenever you have, we generally have a whole lot of processes. So look at this dining philosopher's problem, right? You have these 5 philosophers, you have these 5 chopsticks. What is the probability that all of these philosophers will pick the chopstick at the same time? And actually quite less. So deadlock doesn't happen often in your system. So most of the times we do not use deadlock prevention strategies. We use something else. So what I can do is, I don't bother. It's okay if deadlocks happen once in a while. If I detect a deadlock, then I'll correct it. That is the second policy, right? So let deadlocks happen. So I'll keep looking in my system whether a deadlock is happening or not. And once it happens, I'll break it. So how do you even detect the deadlock happens? You can do this by detecting those cycles in your resource allocation graph. So once you have a cycle, it means there is a deadlock. How do you break the deadlock? Again, you can have a number of policies. So the first policy is kill all. So whichever processes are a part of this cycle, so all these processes are the ones which are deadlocked, all these threads, you kill all these threads. Again, not a good decision to kill every thread, right? So you can say, okay, I won't kill all, I'll kill one by one. So you kill one thread, you see whether deadlock is broken. If it's not broken, kill another. So you are going to stop when you kill the thread which leads to opening up of deadlock. Then again, someone would say, I don't want to kill the threads. Let's rather implement some kind of preemption. Let's snatch some resources from them, right? So what you can do is, whenever you have this cycle, you start snatching the resources from these threads so that you can give it to some other threads. But then snatching sort of brings another problems. So again, you will read more about that in databases. So what will happen? Let's say one process, it was using one particular resource, and now it's a part of deadlock. So you take away that resource from this process. So when you take away that resource from this process, you are actually going some lines up in the code. So let's say this was the fifth line where it has acquired this particular resource. You are taking it away. You should roll this process back to its initial state, to its previous state where it was. And that rolling back is not always possible. What if this process was printing something? So it has acquired something, it has printed. Now you're snatching away the printer from it, but you cannot undo what has been printed on a sheet of paper, right? Not always possible. Okay. So what is generally used in our system is something not it's even this is not used in our system. I'll tell you at the end what is done in our systems, in our personal computers today. So there is another approach which is called deadlock avoidance. So again it comes back in the basket of the system programmer. So deadlock avoidance is again a class of algorithm. What it does is it uses some information. So it asks the processes which resources will you require during your execution, and based on that it makes a choice when to give what. So you have a complete algorithm. Okay, these are the processes, these are the resources which they require. I'll now write an algorithm and I'll allocate the resources in such a way to these processes that deadlocks do not happen. So look at this example here. So let's say I have 12 tape drives in my system. So each of the threads, let's say T0, T1, T2, right? Before starting execution, they are going to tell the system what is their maximum need of tape drives. So T0 here says at max. So definitely it's not always possible to ask them exactly how many resources you need. We'll ask them what is the maximum. So T0 says I require 4 at maximum. T1 says 8, T2 says 12, right? And during the course of their execution, they've already acquired some. So T0 has got 3, it wanted 4, it got 3, T1 got 4, T2 got 4, right? And this could want is actually but their need. What is more they require? So T0 needs 1 more to finish, T1 needs 4 more to finish its execution, T2 requires 8, right? So which one should I execute? So first of all, I have 12 tape drives and I have 3 plus 4, 7 plus 4, 11 are in use, right? I have one resource instance which is available. So to whom should we give it? T0, right? Because if we give it to T1, you will be in a deadlock state, right? There's a possibility that a deadlock will happen in that case. So if we give it to T1, so T1 is going to start using 5. It still needs 3 and it cannot finish its execution with 1 tape drive. Similarly, T2 cannot also do it with 1. So we are going to give it to T0. Once T0 finishes its execution, it's going to release all of these 4 drives. Now I have how many? 4 total, right? Am I correct? Yes, I have 4, right? T0 has finished executing. We now have 4 tape drives. Now which one should I give it to? T1, right? It requires 4. Again, if I give it to T2, there is a possibility of deadlock. So based on this, I can decide the ordering in which these processes can be executed. So we have looked at a very simple example here. Only one resource having many instances. So generally in our systems, we have many resources having many instances, and then again there are various processes. So how are we going to do this in that particular case? So that algorithm, it is called the Banker's algorithm. It makes use of some arrays and matrices. So it's nothing but a generalization of this concept. So how are you going to apply this if there are multiple resources having multiple instances? So this algorithm, we'll talk about it tomorrow. It's very similar to scheduling, as you can say that. It looks similar to shortest job first, I feel. So most of the operating system is about bookkeeping, I would say. And definitely you will see the concept of data structures and algorithms here. So when we'll talk about Banker's algorithm, we'll also see is it good to implement Banker's algorithm in your system once in a while, right? Because whenever you come up with an algorithm for an operating system, it has got some complexity, it has got some running time. So should we even implement that or should we even let it go is another question. Okay, I'll stop here. If there are any questions, I'll take them. Yes, one more thing. So that sheet which I have shared with you, right, for your for your fifth programming assignment, right? Make sure that you fill it by today because I'm going to take a copy of it at the today night.